Welcome, BCSD Australia delegation to COP15. So let me welcome, pardon me, and I don't have COVID, everybody, okay? It's all right. We have to your right and my left, Rain van der Berg from Forico, and we've just announced that Forico has joined as a member of BCSD Australia.
Thank you, Ben.
And she will say wonderful things any moment now about how excited she is about that. We have long-time COP veteran. Got to be careful how I say that, don't I, Rosemary? Rosemary Bissett from the National Australia Bank and Daniel Whitaker from IDEA Group. So welcome, welcome, welcome. And as we did with COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh, the first question that's asked of everybody is, what numbered COP is this for you? Now, I get to start, because I don't know if I said it yesterday, but this is my first biodiversity COP, but it's now my 19th COP under the Rio Summit process started in 1992. So let's start with Rosemary.
So it's my first biodiversity COP.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure of the number of climate COP.
Okay.
So I'd have to try and count them out in my hand.
First biodiversity COP. Let's go now to Daniel. Daniel, what numbered COP is this for you?
This is number 1, biodiversity and otherwise.
And otherwise. Okay. And Rain.
Ditto. First one.
Right. So then we'll go back to Rain and we'll ask the question, what's jumped out at you being a first timer at a COP, let alone a biodiversity COP?
I think the energy in the room is really amazing.
Yeah.
But there's still quite a lot of anticipation of knowing that there's still a lot of work to be done before we get to the end.
Yes. And it's interesting, today we still haven't heard anything about how the negotiations are going. Sometimes that's a good thing to hear, or not hear as the case may be. Daniel, what about you? What struck you about your first time at a COP?
Yeah, I think a bit of the same. The energy is great. There's a lot of different groups here, which is really nice to see. I did expect to hear more from the negotiations, and I attended the negotiations yesterday, and it was mostly just delegating people into different rooms.
Well, that's delegation.
You know, so not a lot of negotiating, a bit more delegating. But yeah, it was very interesting and very excited to be here.
Okay. And Rosemary?
So it is much smaller than the climate COPs.
Yeah.
Which have grown significantly.
In terms of physical size or numbers of people?
Both.
Yep.
Both. But compared to the climate COPs when I first started going, and Copenhagen was my first one, the business and finance presence is much bigger and more recognised. Like the business was really, when I first went to my first climate COP, business and particularly finance was fighting for a voice. Yeah. There was a very much actually finance the bad guys. They just want to do it for the money. But there's a real sense that there's a conversation to be had around particular private sector finance. I think there's not enough space for the number of people that have come.
Yep.
So that, and it's not as well, it's not set up as well for people who haven't been to COP before to understand the process. Because when I first went to my first COP, I got COP 101. So the UN took us through and explained all the processes, what the different meetings were and the different tracks of negotiations. And I, like Dan, went and sat in a meeting the other day too.
Yeah.
And it was one of the Nagoya Protocol sessions, and they were talking about essentially genetic diversity.
Yeah.
It was amazing because the room was full and you could see all the parties there. So they were all really interested in whatever was being said.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to why you've come to this COP. What has it meant for you and your organisation to be here? And what are you looking for, potentially, but certainly looking at to take away from this COP in terms of shared learnings or understandings about what goes on? So we'll start with Dan this time, I think.
Sure. I mean, I guess for me, I'm very interested to see the mechanics of how this all works. As a business, you know, we've got 22 targets in the framework. 14 to 22 are all about implementation and mainstreaming. So very keen to see both where that lands, but also how we get there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people here with a lot of opinions, which is
Yep.
great to get
Yep.
across them. You know, people are coming from all over the world to discuss this. You know, it's great to see where we focus on the reducing threats targets and the sustainable use targets. But yeah, for me, it's the implementation piece that's most interesting.
Okay. So Rosemary, what are you most looking at? Finance.
Finance is a big part of it, but it's also what business is doing, because that's what our customers are doing. It's what governments are doing, and the targets will be important because it will impact what happens in Australian policy. So it will affect what happens with our national biodiversity strategy and agenda, and it will affect what happens to us in terms of potential timing of disclosures and potential other requirements the government may look at implementing to make sure it can deliver on the commitments that it has under the convention. And then it is kind of the knowledge and sharing the opportunity to meet with business and finance sector peers.
Yeah. Right.
You know, much as what's already been said, I suppose for me and for Foraco, it's about telling that story of where we're up to and
Yeah.
where we've been, but equally where we should be going and what does that solution look like for business and how do we play that part. So
Okay.
that's the bit that I'm really interested to glean all the different ideas and the opinions from lots of people in the room, and then see what that next 10 years looks like for us.
Okay. So rapid fire round. Food.
So far, so good.
Food.
My dinner last night was amazing.
It was.
Peruvian Chinese fusion.
Dan.
Food at COP is okay. Food at Montreal is fantastic.
It's an amazing city, isn't
It
it?
is.
God, I
Yeah.
love the
For,
French
for one that's
influence, yeah.
very inside, that they really know how to live. All right. Let's go with. I was going to say show bag, but that's probably not the right question to ask.
Rats and masks.
Rats and masks. Yes, let's do rats and masks. Dan.
I mean, they're pretty strict about the rat on entry every
They are.
day. You know, they are, yeah, they're very much pushing it. It was more than I expected, but you know, if it works, it works.
It is what it is. Rosemary.
Yeah, it's getting used to having to carry a rat around. Not really something that I'd thought about or contemplated before. So it's nice to get rid of it in the morning.
Right?
And then the masks, I suppose we've got used to just as quickly not wearing them back in Australia, but to have them back in an environment like this
Yeah.
is quite strange.
Okay. Experience with. So we're sitting in the what's called the Quebec, which is actually a multi-stakeholder space. To my left, we've got women, NGOs, gender, youth, and over on the right, which none of you can see, dialing in, has business and finance. It's got UN as well. It's got
Faith groups.
subnational governments. We've got faith. My question is, did you expect to see this when you came to a COP? And it's probably not a question for Rosemary because she has experienced it before, but did you expect to see this kind of, not delineation, but these kind of stakeholders having a right to say something in the way that you see them doing it here? Start with you, Ray.
Yeah, I was expecting lots of diverse opinions
Yep.
and stakeholders in the room. I suppose the bit that I'm still yet to see is how they're interacting in these pavilions.
Yeah.
So this is day one. So we've been mostly focused in the finance and business sort of pavilions, but it'd be really interesting to know what those other conversations are happening across the group.
That's what corridors are all about at COPs, is my experience. Yeah.
Okay.
And Daniel.
Yeah, I think much the same. I did expect to see a lot of different groups here. I expect a lot of different groups to have a voice here, but interested to see how it all kind of comes together over the next week.
Yes. So next week, we know it's going to be business, finance, high level, Minister Plibersek. Why not just come in the second week? Why come in the first week?
Because there's still been preparation and some of the discussion to help close off those brackets that are sitting in the text. So actually understanding what they're talking about, it's still meeting with peers and other members of industry and finance. and still people to talk to and things to learn.
People to catch up with,
Yeah,
which we
I
haven't
have
caught up
seen-
with for
Yeah,
arguably 45 years.
and
It's quite
I
amazing.
think these events are actually a kaleidoscope of events is the best way of describing it, and that the all of the people coming together means you get to see, and particularly with COVID opening up hybrid ways of working, you can meet people you haven't ever seen, and you can reconnect with people that are working on the same things from different parts of the world for the first time since COVID. So the Natural Capital Protocol, or the Capitals Coalition
Yes.
team, are here in force and haven't had an opportunity to see them face to face since before COVID.
COVID. In fact, the year before COVID. Yes.
And the Equator Principles Association, again, so peer banks who are involved in project finance. It's a really nice opportunity to sit down and actually talk about some of the things we do, but face to face.
Okay, let's just go quickly around the three of you, and we've basically all been to the same events today. I can't remember what the first one was. What was the first one?
Benchmarking.
Thank you.
lines. Yeah.
Well, benchmarking alliance, and they came out with a very interesting report talking about performance or not of companies. Not so much a question around what did you think of the performance of the companies, but was that something that interested you as business, hearing that kind of narrative here at a COP? I mean, is it better to be in the room and hear that kind of thing, or is it one of those things I would have read it when I was back in Australia and then moved on to the next thing? What's the difference in being at a COP and hearing about it?
That first-hand engagement
Yep.
of hearing that stat as our baseline of where we are now.
Yep.
And then equally for me, they had a whole lot of Indigenous voices afterwards,
Yeah,
putting their perspective to all of
that's
this.
quite amazing.
And
wasn't
there's some real learnings there of making sure that we get that foundation right when we start talking about nature and business, that there's other stakeholders that we're talking about, that it
also
needs to be
interested
about
in the
social,
Yeah.
economic outcomes as well.
Yep. Okay. Any others want to add to that?
I would agree with that. And I think the Indigenous voices from the first day I walked in the COP venue, absolutely. Indigenous voices are loud and strong.
Yeah.
They have a lot to teach us around what it is to care for country,
Yeah.
as we would say in
In
Australia.
Australia.
And that has been much stronger and really noticeable compared to past climate COPs, for
Yeah.
example, for me. It was very much biodiversity, nature, and Indigenous knowledge are all tied up together. And it goes back to the discussions that we're getting in Australia around reconciliation, treaty, and incorporating sort of Indigenous voice
Yeah,
back at
it's
home.
interesting how that's mirrored
Yeah.
here
Yeah.
as well. Then we then had a session led by the WBCSD, which had some very interesting insights into platforms that were being used. I didn't realise they were being used in Australia, but they are very much Northern Hemisphere developed platforms. Give us some insight into what that particular session was about and why you both went to the one on Encore, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So the three platforms were Encore, IBAC, and Trace. Okay. Who wants to explain what those three are, very high level, and why you went to the conversation about them? Because you use Encore.
Well, we have looked at Encore,
Right.
but so they're still in development, but they're a great place for people to start.
Yep.
So any businesses that are really trying to get a generic overview of where they might start talking about biodiversity, I think these platforms start allowing you to prioritize and find that materiality in your industry.
Yeah, right.
So it's good to know that those tools are there. They're very generic, but they'll start the conversation for you and your co-workers, I think. And And then a good part of that conversation was getting feedback from users of where the development should go.
Yeah, which is taking advantage of the opportunity of these people being here, get some immediate reaction. So why was finance interested in these platforms?
So Encore actually was developed as a result of work that the Natural Capital Alliance that is now did with the World UN's Monitoring Centre.
Yeah, right.
And essentially it's there to help you work out the impacts and dependencies that any particular industry sector has on nature. So as Rain said, it's good for helping you work out what are the material impacts and dependencies of a particular company and you could, or a sector, and you can follow that through the economy essentially. IBAT is more sort of to help you understand if you are looking at a particular site or you want to map biodiversity, where are the high conservation value areas? What are the species that you should be concerned about in a particular area? And TRACE is a system that's been developed by for trade to trace essentially the soft commodities supply chains.
Yeah. Daniel, you've been obviously using some of them on behalf of clients, and the work that goes on is international. And that's the thing that really surprised me. I thought that was very localized. What's your observation about the likelihood of these types of platforms growing over time? I got it quite stunned me that I thought that they would actually be quite ubiquitous within the next couple of years because they were being supported by both government and by business. But maybe I'm wrong. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think everyone's kind of looking for a source of data to start with.
Yeah,
it's
right.
like the most common complaint that you hear in this space is a lack of data. Encore is essentially a database of materiality rated impacts, dependencies. It lists out ecosystem services. It was produced by some colleagues at UNEP WCMC. I've used it on a bunch of projects. You know, anyone who's read that thing about half of the world's GDP being dependent on nature from World Economic Forum, that was based on Encore data. I've used Encore data to replicate that study for Australia with Australian Conservation Foundation. So, you know, it is still being used.
You use that?
Yeah, I use that. Yeah. So Encore is being used a lot. IBAT, I mean, it's great because it gives you, you know, there's the star metric. So it's kind of a novel threat metric for biodiversity. You won't really find anything else like that that's so widely available. I mean, it has a huge amount of data going into it. It's been developed by a consortium of different people. So yeah, I think it's very valuable. We've used it on landscape scale assessments, but you can also use it national level. It links through to IUCN databases. So a lot to do there. Trace, I'm less familiar with, but I do know that it's a supply chain essentially tracking piece. I mean, ultimately, there's a lot of work still going on in understanding the value chains in terms of nature risk. So I think that's early days, but I think it will grow.
Okay. Let's now move in the last few minutes to what you're going to be looking at over the next few days and, you know, some of us for the next 2 weeks. Dan, we'll start with you. What are you going to be keeping an eye on and why?
I mean, for me, I want to see what happens in terms of the actual negotiations and what brackets start to fall and, you know, where the sort of sticking points are. There's a lot of interesting discussions happening around things like natural capital accounting, valuation. There's a few different risk and finance things that are going to start to happen over the next few days. I think it's a great opportunity to meet a bunch of people and understand what's going on in terms of approaches. I think things like TNFD are very front of mind for everyone right now. So keen to see what happens there. But yeah, basically there's a ton going on. So trying to keep track of a lot.
Yes, there's nothing. Yes, a double negative answer. Rosemary, and the two of you remaining are speaking in the next 24, 48 hours. So I'd like you to inject into your answer what you're speaking about broadly when those sessions come up.
So NAB is a member of the Equator Principles Association.
Yep.
And the Equator Principles Association is a member of what's called the cross-sector biodiversity initiative,
Yep.
And there is a panel tomorrow,
Yep.
which is talking about nature positive in the sort of extractives industry.
Right.
So some Australian names in there. So BHP and Rio
Yep.
Tinto are on the
Yep.
panel as well. And there's a there's two panels. One's talking about what that nature positive means to the extractive industry, and then I'm on a second panel, which is case studies. And so for us, it's really talking about what we've seen happening in Australia with some of our customers in terms of best practice examples of managing biodiversity and biodiversity risk. And then there's a UNEP-FI, so United Nations Environment Programme Finance Initiative panel, really talking about what its members are doing around TNFD.
Okay.
So task force on nature-related financial disclosures. Yeah.
So, and thank you for both picking up on that, because fingers crossed we've got Tony Goldner from TNFD actually coming onto the program, if not Friday, then Monday.
Yeah, looking forward to the finance discussions.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the discussions around data and tools.
Yeah.
And really interested in some of the discussions that are taking place around sort of the Indigenous role and knowledge. And there's been some interesting stuff even today around the role of work in nature-based solutions. So there's a plethora of topics, but yeah, risk management and the role of finance is absolutely at the forefront of that for me.
And Ray.
Yeah, so I've been asked to present our story of how to value, potentially businesses can value nature.
Yep.
And incorporate that into decision making, better decision making for nature. So I'm looking forward to being part of the panel that's led by the Capitals Coalition.
Yep.
For me, there's lots of interesting conversations going on in the context here, but I'm really interested to see how biodiversity markets can help become a way to scale real solutions and action. So I'm interested to see how we can reward responsible investment and help guide that decision making, so it's not one or the other. It's actually using those productive landscapes in a more cohesive way to get outcomes for profit, people and planet.
Yeah. It's opened my eyes to the maturity of conversation that I didn't think was actually present at this COP yet, but it does seem to have moved so quickly in the last couple of years. I mean, in one sense, maybe that has been one of the positive outcomes of not having the COP, this COP, earlier than it might have happened, because we've had more time, particularly around TNFD, use of data, interface, or the relationships with both the climate negotiations and this one, that you might have a sensible conversation. The last question, positive, neutral, or negative around a Paris Agreement moment at this COP?
Oh, I still want to say positive. I really want it to happen.
Okay, well, I should have started by saying I'm neutral. Okay. So I'm hedging my bets. But you want to go positive? Okay, Rosemary.
Glass half full.
Same. I'm probably neutral to positive. I think they will get there. It'll be interesting to see if they go over time. But it may be they get there with some compromises. So I think it's the watching brief.
What do they give up to actually get there? And Dan?
I'm positive. You can tell it's our first COP. But yeah, look, I'm feeling very positive, you know.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. All right, and that was the second last question. The last question is, of course, you want to come back on the show later in the week to be much more pragmatic as a result of what you're hearing, right?
Cool.
We'll learn.
Good. Yeah. Right, with that, thank you everybody for joining us. Don't forget that the recording of this will be available on our YouTube channel within a few hours after this live stream. But for now, Andrew Petersen signing off and thanking you very much and seeing you tomorrow for Good Day in Montreal. Bye for now.